So, who owns what digital vampires consume? Let's find out by going back to the coldest winter in Europe, maybe ever, 1816, in a place called Villa Diodati in Switzerland. Like back in 1819, a character was born twice, the vampire. First, as a character in a story that was written in 1816. I'll talk to you about that later because this really applies to AI. The story was The Vampyre, Pyre, the first aristocratic vampire in English literature history that led to Dracula and all the vampires you see today. So, in the coldest winter of Europe, up in this mansion, lies Lord Byron, a very famous poet and celebrity, very famous. Percy Shelley, who's an author and also famous. Dr. John Polidori, who is Byron's doctor, and a woman named Mary Godwin, later to become Mary Shelley and the author of Frankenstein. Well, guess where that began? Right in the Villa Diodati, where the vampire began as well. See, they were all stuck inside. Think of this like the pandemic of 1816, except because of a volcano that blew up in Indonesia, we know they didn't. The whole world was blanketed in ash and it got really, really cold that summer. So what did they do? They sat inside and got bored of telling German horror stories which they were reading to each other. Remember, nothing else but books. But these three creative people, prompted by Lord Byron, started into a contest to create a horror story. Consider it like instead of binging horror stories, you're creating horror stories to share with people. So Mary Shelley, Godwin, went and created Frankenstein. Polidori took a fragment that Byron had created and then just gave up and turned it into the story The Vampyre. They all enjoyed it, walked away. Mary Shelley later became famous. But at the same time, in 1819, this is where it becomes like AI. So they published it. But at this time in 1819, Byron had been out of England because of debts and drama in his life, divorce, so much going on. He literally fled the country and never to return. So a publisher, Henry Colburn, inside the UK, published the book The Vampyre, Pyre, under the name of Lord Byron. Because with Lord Byron's name, and the fact that Lord Byron was nowhere around, and this is way old time, so it's not like we have that instant media fix, right? He published it in a magazine and as a book, and things went really, really well for him. Now, when Byron found out about this and Polidori found out about this, they got really upset. But what were they going to do? It had already left. And in the end, they did get attributed and the story was figured out. But that's what put the vampire idea into people's heads. And that's what got it to be 78 years later an inspiration for a man named Bram Stoker writing a book called Dracula.
Yes.
Sound familiar? Because it's sort of like we're seeing today with AI, where it's taking all the work without asking for permission, publishing it, not literally, not the same way that this publisher did by copying it, but still taking original creative work and turning it into something else without consent. So what does this all mean for AI? In a way, AI has so much in common to creators because they feel like their story has been stolen. Now, not like Polidori and Byron, it wasn't published exactly as it is, but the theme is still there. If somebody takes something from you, that's where the vampire theme came to my friend, and it makes such sense. You feel like this thing you don't understand, you don't see, is taking away what you have. And what's interesting is it started with a prompt, one by Lord Byron. That little fragment was basically the prompt. Polidori was like the AI creating the output, the book. And then the publisher was the one who took it and almost published it without giving credit to either of those two. And that was later cleared up. But here's the key with AI. 78 years later, when Bram Stoker picks up The Vampire, gets inspired, and writes what's become even better book, Dracula, he starts the whole genre that leads up to what we've seen in the Twilight series and True Blood. That whole thing built on that inherent fear that Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, again would call our shadow self, projected onto reality. That is a lot of what's going on with AI. Now, let me get you on game here to make sure that you're tracking with me. I'm not saying they're the same, but if Bram Stoker had said, "Oh, I was successful with Dracula, published it, I want to thank the people who created it," he would have been paying the publisher. That's who would have had the copyright, who had stolen it. And that's what they're equating with AI in their minds, their perception. I'm not saying it's like that, but if you understand the theme of the vampire and where it comes from, a deep human fear, you start understanding there's more to this story than just someone stealing and publishing a work and making some money off of it. It's taking it without consent or permission, and that's even harder to handle often than the financial impact for somebody who wrote it, created it, and spent the time.